Got a special guest speaker for y'all today. Our dad. The one we've always looked up to and still do. Come on in, Pop.
Okay.
Yeah, this is our hero right here, and he's got a word to share with you today. Listen up.
Thank you. If I was going to add a title to this teaching today, this lesson, I would have to say it would be like, don't pass judgment before you know all the specifics, all the circumstances. What I want to read from today is the book of Jonah. I always considered myself to be one who could tell a book by its cover. And I did that for years until I found out that I was wrong more than I was right. Once I got to know people, once I opened that book, I saw that it was a lot different than what I thought it was going to be. We have to be careful judging people. And I think one of the worst ones I think we judge in the Old Testament is Jonah. He's a man of God, but he turns around and he runs away from God after he gets God's orders. And you have to say to yourself, why? Just looking at it, starting here in the beginning. Well, the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come upon me, come before me. Nineveh was composed of people who were some of the most barbaric, violent people that ever walked the face of the earth. And Jonah knew this. In fact, at this particular time, the Ninevites were right on the border of the northern kingdom of Israel where Jonah was from. And what they would do, they would come into a city and they would give an ultimatum. Surrender to us or die. And if you decided you were going to surrender, that was one thing. You would live, but it wasn't going to be good. If you decided you were going to resist, then you had a real problem because they were going to kill everybody in that city. And what they would do would be to take all the bodies and pile them up outside the city walls. And they would leave them there so that anybody passing by would see that and say, uh-oh, the Ninevites have been here. This is their trademark. This is what they do. Now, if you decided you wanted to surrender, they had a long rope, and it had like fish hooks off the end of it. And off the thing, every so often there'd be a fish hook. And when they would take the people's hands and tie them behind their backs, they'd take that big fish hook and drive it right up through the roof of their mouth. That way one soldier could pick up the end of the rope and walk off with 100 people. And nobody was going to resist them. How could you resist? You were going to go. And they would take them to other cities or other nations. And after a couple of generations, there'd be no more remembrance of their hometown, of their homeland. And this was their whole idea. But this is why Jonah came to a point where he said, I'm going to go my way. There's another thing that comes into account we'll come into later. But this is basically what he said. But God says, tell them to repent, tell them to turn from their wicked ways. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord and went to Joppa. He found a ship going to Tarshish, and he paid the fare thereof and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. The Lord sent out a great wind into the sea, and there was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. The Lord's always in control. He's the creator. And when Jonah got on that ship, like I said, the Lord called out a raging storm. And the mariners, the sailors on that ship thought sure that they were all going to die. And they were all scared to death. And the captain of the ship, he turns around and he looks down below deck. And what's he find? He finds Jonah down there, sound asleep. And he wakes him up. And he said, who are you and where are you from? What's your occupation? And he tells him that I'm a man of God. I'm from northern Israel. And he takes him upstairs, up to the top deck with him. The mariners, meanwhile, these were superstitious people, and they were not believers. They were believers in their own gods. That's plural, not singular. And they were casting lots to see who it was who was going to be responsible for all this. And the lot fell to Jonah. And Jonah, no matter what you consider him as, never consider him to be a coward. As he said, it's me. I'm the one. And he said, what can we do about this to stop this sea? And he volunteers and says, throw me overboard. And this is a story that we've all read and known since we were children in Sunday school. But we never stopped to think why. Why did Jonah do this? Why did he deliberately disobey God? They said, everyone to his fellow, come and let us cast lots. And they did. And it fell to Jonah. And Jonah said, throw me into the sea. And they did. They picked him up and they threw him into the sea. And immediately the raging storm stopped and the sea was calm. And in my mind's eye, I picture Jonah being like the bait on a hook when you're fishing, just going straight on down to the bottom of the sea. And it says that God had prepared a great fish. No other fish was allowed to touch him but this great fish. And I can just imagine that as he's going down there on this hook or whatever, that these other fish are coming by and saying, oh, there's dinner. And no one's allowed to touch him. He finally gets to the bottom and the great fish swallows him whole. Jonah prayed as soon as he got there. He prayed to the Lord. And this was good because he's been disobeying God. And he prayed. And he said, I cried by reason of my affliction unto the Lord. And he heard me. Out of the belly of hell, or the grave, I cried. And you heard my voice. Isn't that so true with most of us? A lot of times we don't pray until we get caught up in some kind of an affliction. Well, he was in one that we'll never see, hopefully. But he says, you cast me into the deep in the midst of the seas, and the floods compassed me about, and thy billows and thy waves passed over me. And I said, I am cast out of my sight. I am cast out of thy sight. Yet I will look again upon thy holy temple. The waters compassed me about, even to the soul. The depth closed round about me, and weeds were wrapped around my head. That seaweed was all wrapped around him. It paints quite a vivid picture. You can understand just what was going on there. I went down to the bottom of the mountains, bottom of the sea. The earth with her bars was about me forever. Yet hast thou brought up my life from corruption, O Lord my God. No corruption, no decay of his body. Just like Christ when he was in the tomb for 3 days and 3 nights. He did not see corruption. There was no decay of his body. When my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to thee, into thine holy temple. This was Jewish thought in those days, that the temple was where God resided. And I'm sure that Jonah, being a man of God, made an annual trip to that temple and prayed and spoke to God there. It says here, I will sacrifice unto thee with the voice of thanksgiving. I will pay that which I have vowed. Salvation is of the Lord. He's saying here that I'm going to do a roundabout. I'm going to turn tail on this. I ran from you before. This time I want to do exactly what you're telling me. And the Lord spake unto the fish, and it vomited out Jonah upon the dry land. Now this isn't scriptural. This is in my own mind. But again, I have to ask why. We find that Jonah goes on to Nineveh. Nineveh, by the way, is located up in northern Iraq, or today. That's where you would find it. But unfortunately, you don't find it anywhere Today, you may find some remnants, but that's about all. It's gone. But that's where it was. That people in that area think they know what terrorism is today, but they have no idea compared to what these Ninevites had brought about. And the word of the Lord came unto Jonah the second time, saying, Arise, go into Nineveh, that great city, and preach unto it the preaching that I bid thee. Excuse me. It was a great city, all right. The city was the hub of international trade. He said it was like better than probably 150,000 people that lived there. And when you had all these trade routes coming in there, that was quite a sizable city. In fact, the king had built a palace for himself with 80 rooms, and he brought in 12 canals, bringing fresh water in from the hills. It was really something. It was a great city. It was probably the biggest city known to man at that time. So Jonah arose and went into Nineveh according to the word of the Lord. Again, this is the figment of my imagination, I know, but I think it's possible that it's something like this did happen. You take these people who I said were so violent and barbaric and just wretched people who had no respect whatsoever for human life, killed people like left and right, and all of a sudden they're going to turn around. I say to myself, why? Why would they suddenly turn around? The king and all of them. And as you look at it, I use my imagination, I guess, on this, but I bet you there must have been a witness standing on that shore or walking by. And this great fish vomits Jonah up onto the shore. Can you imagine what he looks like? He's been 3 days in the belly of that fish. He doesn't have a stitch of clothes on him. It's all eaten away. He probably didn't have a hair left on his body. And his body must have been snow white. Can you imagine what that person saw and what he thought? Must have looked like a ghost coming up there. Anyway, he goes to Nineveh, according to the word of the Lord. Nineveh was an exceeding great city of 3 days' journey. And Jonah began to enter into the city a day's journey, and he cried and said, Yet 40 days, and Nineveh shall be overthrown. What a thing to say to those people, unless there was some kind of forewarning. So the people of Nineveh believed God and proclaimed a fast and put on sackcloth, from the greatest even to them of the least of them. For word came unto the king of Nineveh, and he rose from his throne, he and his robe, and he laid his robe from him, and covered him with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. And he caused it to be proclaimed and published throughout Nineveh, by the decree of the king and his nobles, saying, Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything, let them neither feed nor drink water. Excuse me. But man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and cry mightily unto God. He's saying that this God he's talking about is Jehovah God. These heathen people are turning to Almighty God. And the outstanding thing about this is, in the New Testament, we're told that we're to go unto the world and tell them about Jesus Christ, go out. This was never done in the Old Testament. This was never done. You would see, like the Queen of Sheba, come in here, and